kill him yet, because I can't get up.
Give him a heave-ho.
Hey, you see, it's a mule. It's not a horse. It's a mule.
Happens to all of us, unfortunately. All right, guys. Well, welcome. Where are you from? You're not Falcons fans, are you?
Giants.
Actually, we're originally from up north, New York and Pennsylvania, but we've been living in Atlanta for a long time.
I see. Well, welcome to the city of New Orleans. My name is Miles. I'm going to be your guide today. As Sherman was saying, we're going to take you on a 2.5 or 3 mile trek around the colonial city of New Orleans. The Vieux Carré, the Old Square, that's what the locals call our French Quarter. Our pilot in this operation, I'm just the co-pilot, is Bojo. Bojo is a mule. We only use mules to pull carriages here in the city of New Orleans. That's city ordinance since 1983. Mule is a hybrid animal, half donkey, half horse. It's 1.5 times stronger than your average horse. Cooler headed, handles our heat and humidity a whole lot better than a horse. We only use mules to pull carriage. Tour begins at Jackson Square. Jackson Square is the heart of the city of New Orleans. Today it is dominated by our St. Louis Cathedral. St. Louis Cathedral is the oldest continuously active Catholic cathedral in the United States. The cathedral has stood on that spot since 1794. This wasn't always this beautiful garden that you see in front of the cathedral beyond the black iron gate. This area was once a military parade ground called the Place d'Armes under our French founders, the Plaza de Armas under their Spanish successors. Both phrases mean the same thing, literally the place of arms. They conducted military drills and exercises here and held public executions by hanging and firing squad. The gallows stood about where the equestrian statue of Major General Andrew Jackson stands today. Major General Jackson was the 7th president of these United States, more notably for our purposes, hero of the Battle of New Orleans. The Battle of New Orleans was not actually fought in New Orleans, minor detail. It was fought 7 miles down the Mississippi River in what is today Chalmette, Louisiana. Last battle of the War of 1812, fought January 1815. On that day, Major General Jackson's forces inflicted more than 2,000 casualties on the invading British Army, while our American forces lost a mere 12 men. Since 1851, the square has been dedicated to Major General Jackson. All right, we're going to get started. Again, my name is Miles. If you have any questions along the way, please don't hesitate to ask. If there's something you can stop and take a picture of, just give me a little bit of advance notice. I'll be more than happy to do so. If I don't hear anything from you guys, I'm just going to prattle on. Okay? Moving out.
Who has the right of way?
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, it depends on the size of the mule and the tolerance of the driver. A lot of mule drivers do things like this across the red light. Shoes.
Like horses. You know horseshoes?
All the mules are shod. Anytime they lose a shoe, they can't work. Have all 4 shoes to work. If they happen to lose a shoe, they go immediately back to the barn and have to wait for the farrier. That's the man who comes in. Alright guys, we are traveling south on Decatur Street. Decatur is one of the 4 streets that borders the 36 square grid that is the French Quarter, the Vieux Carré. We're going to be traveling again from one end of the colonial city of New Orleans to the other today. Steamboat Natchez off to our left beyond the retaining wall is at port. The Natchez is one of only 6 steamboats that continues to operate along the Mississippi. Now we're coming up on a statue dead ahead, a bronze statue. That is our founder, the first governor of French Louisiana, Jean-Baptiste Solemoine de Bienville. Bienville came here in 1717 with a charter from King Louis XIV of France, the man after whom Louisiana is named. He also brought with him a French military engineer named Adrien de Pouget, 6 specialist carpenters, and about 40 convicts from the Bastille, famous Parisian prison. The convicts were given the charge of building the original city of New Orleans. To Bienville's left is a Catholic monk, to his right a Native American chieftain. The monk points to the long-standing tradition and influence of the Catholic Church here in the city of New Orleans. The chieftain to the present is the contribution of our 2 indigenous Indian tribe, Chapatoulas Indians. The name Chapatoulas means the people who live by the river. And it was Chapatoulas scouts who led the French explorer Robert de La Salle down to the mouth of the Mississippi River in 1682, so about 35 years before Bienville got here. De La Salle is the man who claimed all this territory. We are traveling into the old city now on Bienville Street. We are at the extreme southern end of the colonial city now in the upper quarter. Now it seems paradoxical to say upper and southern, but when you come to the city of New Orleans, you have to throw compass directions out the window. That's because everything goes by the flow of the Mississippi. Okay? So the upper quarter is south of the lower quarter, and uptown New Orleans is south of downtown. The upper quarter and uptown are upriver. Okay? The lower quarter and downtown are downriver. Right? So that's why we say uptown, downtown, in spite of the fact that uptown is south of downtown. One of the only cities in the United States where that is true. The only one, to my knowledge. So it was the Bourbon line of France, the Bourbon kings of France, that founded the city of New Orleans. About 90% of the streets in the French Quarter are named for the Bourbon kings of France, or figures affiliated with the Bourbon line. That includes Bourbon Street. Bourbon Street is not named for Kentucky bourbon whiskey, but for the Bourbon line of France. A large majority of the architecture you see throughout the French Quarter today is in fact not French, folks. It's Spanish. That's because the Spanish were in power here from 1762 to 1803, when New Orleans was briefly reclaimed by Napoleon and France before being sold to the U.S. via the Louisiana Purchase. During the time the Spanish were in power, there was a great fire in the city of New Orleans that began on Good Friday, 1788, and destroyed about 90% of the French colonial city, took with it 60% of her population. The Spanish rebuilt the city after the fire. That's why the large majority of the architecture you see in the quarter today is in fact Spanish. Before Emeril Lagasse, the most famous chef ever to hail from the city of New Orleans, was Paul Prudhomme. Paul Prudhomme opened his first restaurant right here in Cape Falls, Louisiana.
Oh, yeah. I know him. Yeah, I don't know personally. You heard of that before. I wish he was related.
1978. That's when Chef Prudhomme devised his signature dish, blackened redfish. She cooked in a cast iron skillet. It's very popular again nowadays to cook with cast iron, but it wasn't in the late 70s. Paul Prudhomme brought it back. The dish, blackened redfish, became so popular that we almost fished redfish out of existence in Louisiana's estuary. The oldest slave auction house in the United States once stood right here on the corner of Chartres and St. Louis. Pierre Maspero's slave exchange from 1788. Slave ships docked where the steamboat Natchez is docked today. Slaves were brought up St. Louis and auctioned right here at Maspero. Pierre Maspero was a trader. This is the Napoleon House, National Historic Landmark building, built by a mayor of New Orleans named Nicholas Girard. Girard was a big fan of Napoleon Bonaparte, and in fact, he built that building so Napoleon could come here to New Orleans and live out his retirement in our city. But, you know that a hotel next door is called the Hotel St. Louis. This points to a glaring problem with Mayor Girard's plan to bring Napoleon here. Namely, the building was completed sometime after 1815. Napoleon was in fact in exile on the island of St. Helena in the southern Atlantic. Well, Mayor Girard was heartbroken, devastated to find this out. But in fact, this did not deter him. He continued to try to bring Napoleon here to New Orleans. How was he going to do that? He was going to do it by hiring the smuggler, mercenary, buccaneer for hire, the pirate Jean Lafitte, to sail to the southern Atlantic with his mercenaries, his barataria, rescue Napoleon from exile, and bring him here to New Orleans anyway. Mayor Girard threw a lot of money at Lafitte to do this job, and Lafitte was apparently going to try it. Lafitte was, in fact, planning his expedition to the southern Atlantic to St. Helena when Napoleon died in 1821. Now, Napoleon never made it to New Orleans, not for lack of trying. We do have one of 4 of Napoleon's death masks, which can be seen in the Cabildo Museum. Cabildo is the gray building just here on the south side of St. Louis Cathedral. That was the first Capitol building of French and Spanish Louisiana, first jailhouse, first courthouse. It is now our historical museum. And that's where you can see one of the 4 death masks of Napoleon. It is worth more than $2 million US. That great fire of 1788 I was telling you about, the one that destroyed 90% of the city, began right here in Lubbock Theater. It wasn't, of course, Lubbock Theater at the time. It began because a votive candle fell off a Catholic devotional altar in the building went up in flames. Now the fire started, as you may note, steps away from St. Louis Cathedral. Typically, that would have been a good thing. Because cathedral bells, church bells, were like fire alarms in the pre-modern world. The fire would break out, you run to the town square, where inevitably there was a church, you ring the bells to alert the fire brigade that you have a problem. They come out and put the fire out. But that couldn't happen on that day because it was Good Friday. Good Friday is the day of mourning, the day of observed silence in Catholic tradition. So the tradition was to tie the bells to single cathedral. So no cathedral bells, no fire alarm. We lost 90% of the city. The Spanish rebuilt it. That's why all this lovely architecture you see throughout the French Quarter, including the Creole town home, which is sort of the signature architectural style of the quarter, is in fact Spanish. Now, the Spanish were famous for their iron work, and New Orleans has become famous for iron work. The large majority of the iron work you see throughout the quarter is wrought iron. Wrought iron is forged by hand with a hammer and anvil. All the intricate detail work you see on many of these balconies, that's pounded out by hand. Wrought iron also has a very high nickel content. Almost rust-proof. Get around. Get around here, you. The Mule. So wrought iron is almost rust-proof, which is a very good thing with our moist climate we have down here in the city of New Orleans. This is Pat O'Brien, one of the most celebrated bars in the city of New Orleans, home to the dueling pianos and the Hurricane Cocktail. Hurricane Cocktail is so named not because of all the hurricanes we have down here, but because it comes in a glass shaped like a hurricane lamp.
Oh, okay.
That is,
I heard about that.
Yeah. Every hurricane is a double, folks. Every hurricane is a double. Keep this in mind.
We'll take that.
6 ounces of Caribbean rum in the hurricane. Some people forget this to their peril. Turning onto Bourbon Street now, folks. Famous Bourbon Street. We're about halfway down here, moving from the upper city into the lower city. On your right is Johnny White's Pub and Grill, which has the distinction of being the only establishment in the French Quarter never to have closed during Hurricane Katrina. Beautiful view of the rear of our St. Louis Cathedral there. The cathedral is named for Louis IX of France, another member of the Bourbon line, canonized by the Catholic Church for fighting in the Crusades, and according to legend, bringing the crown of thorns back to the Holy Land. Yep. Marie Laveau's House of Voodoo on the corner of Bourbon and St. Anne, named for our own voodoo queen, Marie Laveau. That's where you pick up your souvenir voodoo doll while you're here. Marie Laveau is buried in our St. Louis Cemetery, #1, the oldest cemetery in the city of New Orleans. She She gained a massive following here in the 19th century, died in 1881 under mysterious circumstances, beheaded in her own home. Nobody knew quite what to make of that.
A dog got her. One of the dogs got her.
The Clover Grill up here on our right has been in many movies. Most recently, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. Anybody see Benjamin Button?
No.
No.
There's a scene where Kate Blanchett and Brad Pitt had dinner at a diner, Clover Grill. Lots of films being shot down here in Louisiana. Now, the marquee at the Clover Grill says they have the world's best hamburgers, but they're lying to you about that. The world's best hamburgers are here in the city of New Orleans, so do not fear. 3 blocks northward, you'll find Esplanade Avenue. You make a left on Esplanade, 250 yards down on your left is the Port of Call. Port of Call has the world's best hamburger. Hamburgers so good that they don't serve French fries with them, only stuffed baked potatoes. You inevitably will have to wait in line, but even Brad Pitt waits in line for a table at Port of Call. Anyway, they have a signature cocktail there, a house cocktail called the Monsoon. Have one of those while you're waiting on your burger and the time will fly by.
Okay.
The building on our left is the oldest bar in the United States. The headquarters of the pirate, smuggler, buccaneer for hire, Jean Lafitte. This building survived the Great Fire of 1788. As a result, it's one of the few examples of French colonial-style residential architecture left in the French Quarter. Some trademarks of that French colonial style are that roof line that runs parallel to the street, the centrally located chimney stack, the brick between the post construction, so-called for obvious reasons. Our French military engineer, Adrien de Fouget, he came down here to build the original city of New Orleans with Bienville in 1717. He realized very quickly he needed a wood that wouldn't rot very easily here in the city of New Orleans. He found cypress. There's a cypress beam you see in between the bricks. Cypress trees thrive in the swamp, which is more or less where we are down here in the city of New Orleans. So he used cypress in building the original city of New Orleans. Now, why the need for the beamwork at all?
You can get through.
If I hit it, fucking man, you ain't gonna pay it.
Oh. Hey, there's kids here.
Yeah, well, I'm asking the
Sorry, I had to speak up.
Not your fault.
Just like New York. Just like Brooklyn.
It's not midnight yet.
Oh, there's the horn. See, you got to throw the horn in there.
All right.
He's a little.
Get everybody through here. Great. Okay. Back to the cypress tree. Cypress trees thrive in the swamp. So that's why we use cypress in the building of the original city of New Orleans. The need for the beamwork is because of the bricks down here, made from Mississippi River mud and sand. They're a little softer and more malleable than an average brick. So it needs a kind of skeletal structure to hold the building together. That's why the need for the beams in the first place. This was the headquarters of the pirate Lafitte. It may have been the spot where Andrew Jackson himself came down here to the lower city to meet Lafitte in December of 1814 to ask for his assistance to fight at the Battle of New Orleans, which would occur less than a month later, January 1815. That meeting may also have taken place in the upper city of what is today Maspero's, the old slave exchange. We don't know for sure. What we do know is that Lafitte wound up contributing more than 80 Baratarian mercenaries to fight alongside Andrew Jackson at the Battle of New Orleans and gained a pardon for more than 35 years of piracy for having done so. This building and all historic buildings in the quarter are governed by our Vous Carré Commission, the historic commission that tries to maintain the historical integrity of buildings like these. So the facade of the blacksmith shop looks as it would have looked in the 1760s when the building was originally constructed, except the fact that they've exposed the beamwork and the brickwork so you can see the bones of the building. The stucco will cover the inside. They're also working with a security camera to speak with this wire.
Look at the Pirate's House, huh, Diane?
Yeah. And what year was that built?
1760.
I like that
It's never a blacksmith shop, by the way. Smithing was a cover for Lafitte's smuggling. This is John McDonough Elementary School. John McDonough, number 15. Two individuals who gained an infamous reputation at the school here. Lee Harvey Oswald, on the one hand, and exercise guru Richard Simmons. One of about 40 schools in the city of New Orleans named for the Scottish Baron John McDonough, wealthiest man in the city of New Orleans in the middle 19th century. Also apparently the cheapest. McDonough had plantation homes on the west bank of the Mississippi. We're on the east bank here, New Orleans. He refused to pay the ferry fare to get across the river. Of course, one of his slaves to row him across the river in a rowboat. But when he died in 1898, he left a large sum of money to the New Orleans public education system, such as it was in 1898. Today he's celebrated as a kind of father of public education here in the city. So we have 40 McDonough schools. I told you about the wrought iron work. The best example of cast iron in the city of New Orleans is right up here at the Cornstalk Plant Hotel. Cast iron, unlike wrought iron, is poured into an existing mold, and it rusts fairly easily. For that reason, it is commonly painted, like the fence you see here. This was once the residence of a young doctor and his wife. They moved here from Iowa. He was here to treat victims of a yellow fever epidemic that swept through the city of New Orleans in the late 19th century. She was an Iowa farm girl, and she got pretty quickly being down here in the city of New Orleans. So he had that fence cast for her to look like a row of Iowa corn. So every time she looked out the window of her mansion, she'd be reminded of home. The vast renovation project that turned the old military parade ground into Jackson Square was undertaken in 1851. We're going to pull around to the north side now, Jackson Square, next to the Presbyteer, the building that is today our cultural museum. I showed you the Cabildo, which is our historical museum. That is on the south side of the square. This is the north side of the square. Even the locals get confused about the upper, lower, and southern. The Presbyteer is where the clergy who once celebrated Mass at St. Louis Cathedral lived. It's now our cultural museum, Mardi Gras Museum. The renovation project was undertaken in the middle 19th century, 1851, by the Baroness Michaela Almonaster Montalva. She was the daughter of one of the foremost Spanish architects.
I'm taking videos of them.
His name was Don Andres Almonaster. He was the man responsible for rebuilding the city of New Orleans after the fire of 1788. He is buried beneath the high altar of St. Louis Cathedral, along with 46 other individuals. His daughter, Michaela, the Baroness, was born here, raised here. She came of age. She was married off to the son of one of her father's political rivals, carted off to Paris in an attempt to sort of smooth over the waters between these two feuding families.
Boo.
Well, the Baroness didn't get along with her new husband, or her father-in-law for that matter. When her husband died young, prematurely, well, things really went south. She was always feuding with her father-in-law about money, estate matters. The relationship grew to be so shaky that the Baroness actually was almost murdered by the father-in-law. Her father-in-law tried to kill her twice. Shot her 5 times in her sleep. But he was a bad marksman. He only managed to shoot off her right pinky finger. She wore a glove on that hand the rest of her life, but was otherwise unscathed. And when killing her off Paris, out of the family's estate matters, and get back to New Orleans. When she did, there was a caveat. She had to keep her married name, her appearance's sake. Appearance being very important on the came back here with that settlement money, and she beautified, renovated, and dedicated the old Place des Armes to Major General Andrew Jackson. She built 2 apartment buildings in Blanket Square, the upper and lower Montalva apartment buildings. They are Parisian-style luxury apartment buildings, the first of their kind in North America. And she plastered that married name, the name that got her all that money, all over every balcony panel on the upper and lower Montalva buildings. So as we pass by, look up into the balcony here.
That's all cast iron, right?
That's wrought. Look up into the balcony. There's a center crest. There's the initials AP. Can you see those?
Oh, yeah.
See the AP? Yeah. Michaela Almonaster Montalva. Those are her maiden and married initials. She also put the final significant renovation on St. Louis Cathedral. She put the spires on it in 1851, and then of course she had the equestrian statue of Major General Jackson cast. That's another famous example of cast iron. The equestrian statue of Jackson set at the center of the square, and the whole thing then dedicated to the hero of the Battle of New Orleans. Now, jazz music was born here in New Orleans, not in the old colonial city, but just beyond the old Rampart fortifications, what is today called Rampart Street, in a red light district called Storyville. Storyville was home to some of the most famous brothels in the history of New Orleans and the history of the U.S. And in fact, that's where the earliest jazz musicians played. Because the earliest jazz musicians were playing in and around brothels, they named their music after the most famous prostitute they could think of. Only she wasn't a prostitute. She was a Persian queen. They called it Jezebel music. Jezebel had become a popular nickname for prostitutes in the 20s. They called it Jezebel music in the beginning. That name evolved over time, which happens pretty commonly down here in the state of Louisiana. Language gets thrown into the blender and comes out some fraction of what it originally was. So Jezebel music became jazz music and evolved into jazz music. That's how jazz music got its name. The home of one of our Jazz Hall of Famers up here on the left, Danny the Birdman Barker, was born right here in this Creole town home, January 1909. You probably never heard of Danny Barker, but you probably have heard of his friend and contemporary, Louis Armstrong. Both men were trailblazers in the jazz movement here. Building coming up beyond the stop sign, the corner of Charters and Ursuline, is the old Ursuline Convent. Like Lafitte's blacksmith shop, the convent survived the Great Fire of 1788, and again gives us some idea what the colonial city would have looked like. The Ursuline nuns have had a presence here since the foundations of our city. They still do today. This is now a Catholic museum and cultural center. The Ursuline nuns have a convent uptown today on State Street in the Garden District. This building on our left, the yellow building with the columns and the double stairwell porches, the Beauregard Keyes home. One-time residence of notable author Francis Parkinson Keyes and General P.G.T. Beauregard. Francis Parkinson Keyes, they had no relationship. They just lived there at different times. Francis Parkinson Keyes wrote many novels, among them Dinner at Antoine's, a reference to our own Antoine's restaurant on St. Louis, oldest restaurant in the city of New Orleans. Beauregard was sent here by Andrew Jackson to guard the old U.S. Mint on Esplanade, which sits beyond the French market. He was later restationed to South Carolina, where he commanded the Confederate forces at the first military action of the Civil War at Fort Sumter. Famously had the opportunity to capture Grant's army at Shiloh, and failed to do so, not for any strategic reason, but because he called off the battle on account of darkness. Of course he did, he was a Southern gentleman. You don't fight in the dark. But he fell out with the Confederate brain trust after that. He moved back to New Orleans in 1866, lived right there at the Beauregard Keyes home, became a successful businessman and philanthropist. Helped to start the oldest continuously active public transportation line in the U.S., our very own St. Charles streetcar line. These are Creole townhomes, Greek Revival townhomes from the late 19th century. The Beauregard Keyes home was early Greek Revival, 1826. This is late Greek Revival. If you ask me what's Greek about these townhomes, I would tell you nothing. Greek Revival evolved over the course of the 19th century, to the point where the 1880s, 1890s, what you get is anything with 4 piers, pillars, balusters out front, platforms, that's Greek Revival. Early Greek Revival, of course, has true Greek columns, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, like on the Beauregard Keyes home. New Orleans-style shotgun homes on our right, so-called because you can fire a shotgun from the front door out the back without hitting anything. Shot straight through. This is what passes for razor wire in the city of New Orleans. We are at the extreme lower end of the colonial city now, the extreme northern end of the border. 1 block away is Esplanade Avenue, so begins the first suburb of the city of New Orleans, the Marigny.
These are all private residences, right?
Yes, these are all private residences. And in fact, about 80% of the lower quarter is residential. North of St. Philip Street, which is the street that runs next to that school.
lot of famous people live here?
A handful live down here, and then a handful live uptown in the Garden District. So in the Garden District, we have Sandra Bullock, John Goodman, Anne Rice. Look at these spikes on the poles, folks. Yeah. Down here, we have Lenny Kravitz, Brad and Angelina. I'm going to show you Brad and Angelina's home. So those spikes, you see them throughout the quarter, they're called Romeo and Juliet spikes. The Spanish barons who rebuilt the city after the fire of 1788, they put them there. They were a paranoid lot. From the beginning of the city on, convicts were largely charged with doing hard labor here. And the Spanish barons who ran the city from 1762 to 1803 were terrified of it. And scallywags and scoundrels like John Lafitte, particularly afraid that some of these persons of ill repute might decide to climb up the poles and visit their impressionable young daughter's bedroom some night. They put those spikes on the poles, they call them Romeo and Juliet spikes. As the saying goes, you might go up the pole of Romeo if you're coming down to Juliet. Speaking of famous people, the gray building, the black ironwork, right here dead ahead, going to be off to the right of the carriage when we make the turn, was recently owned by the actor Nicolas Cage, who failed to pay his property taxes, so it got seized by the IRS.
Years ago.
The most haunted building in the city of New Orleans, the LaLaurie Mansion. Once owned by a doctor and his wife, her name was Delphine LaLaurie. Highly influential Italian heiress, a member of the Borgia clan of Italy. Loose Confederates of the pirate Lafitte. Why is it haunted? Well, these two had a penchant for performing grisly Frankensteinian-style experiments on their slaves. They had a laboratory on the upper floors of the mansion where they performed these grisly experiments, which entailed all kinds of horrible stuff.
Practicing medicine. That's called practicing medicine, right?
Yeah. Amputations and vivisections and lobotomies. Anyway, one night they were found out. They were having a dinner party. Their cook, who was chained to the stove, as was their custom, managed to start a fire, get the authorities called out. When they arrived, they were directed to the upper room, which was the LaLaurie's laboratory. The authorities found a ghastly scene of blood and body parts and individuals maimed for life, many more who had died in the course of the experiments. Then they noticed a strange smell that permeated the entire upper section of the mansion. They started opening up the walls and the floors, and at the end of the day found more than 200 corpses throughout the LaLaurie Mansion, upon whom these experiments had been conducted. The spirits of those slaves haunt the LaLaurie Mansion today. Perhaps they kept Nicolas Cage from paying his property taxes. Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, at least sometimes, live right here, the gray building with the green carriage floor. 3,700 square feet, 4 bedrooms, 4 baths, atrium-style carriage home, big atrium courtyard in the middle, surrounded by living quarters. Brad Pitt has been extremely active here in New Orleans since Hurricane Katrina. His philanthropic foundation, Make It Right Foundation, dedicated to the revitalization of the city and primarily to the building of ecologically friendly homes in areas hardest hit by the storm. No, sir. The French Quarter is on a natural high ground. So the alluvial soil and stuff of the Mississippi has created a natural levee. It's about, on average, about 3.5 feet above sea level. French Quarter. That doesn't sound like much, but it counts for something down here. There was wind damage from this flood. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Well, much of the city is below sea level. Yeah. Just so happens that the French Quarter is. Certain areas of town where, yeah, hard rain. Pretty severe. The golden statue, the lady on horseback, is Joan of Arc, the maid of Napoleon. That statue was donated to the city of New Orleans by Charles de Gaulle. Right. A replica of a larger version is near the Louvre in Paris. Y'all heard of the muffalata sandwich?
Yeah.
It's created right here in the Central Coast. You have to love olives to love them up alive. If you like olives.
Mother? There you go.
Taylor, you want an olive?
Drop me off.
Beads? Well, New Orleans being the most European city, has profound French and Spanish and Catholic influence. Well, Mardi Gras began celebrating Fat Tuesday. Right, okay, Wednesday. It's a big blowout party, that they would have before Lent started.
Taxis beeping once around.
The Catholics borrowed tradition from the Roman triumph. During the Roman triumph, victorious general paraded through town with prisoners of war, and horses, and cloaks, and ram regalia, throwing doubloons and valuables that he had taken from. Well, the doubloons he had not taken, but oftentimes he would have taken the jewelry or what have you from the royal family of whoever it was that the Romans had defeated. I said, ho! Ho! Now you can do it. So, the Catholic Church essentially took on that tradition to celebrate Fat Tuesday by throwing out these beads. Originally, beads were gems. And then they have just evolved into plastic beads over time. So when the Catholic Church took up root here, both we were first French, 1762, and then Spanish, 1768, and then came America via the Lutheran Church. Both those cultures were profoundly influenced by Catholic religion. We were one of the last major U.S. cities to actually become American, right? So that's kind of where the Mardi Gras tradition began.
So what's your favorite restaurant?
Yeah. What?
Favorite restaurant?
My favorite restaurant is probably in the French Quarter or without, or outside.
In the French Quarter.
In the French Quarter is probably Irene, which is on the corner of Charters and St. Philip. We actually passed right by it.
And what's their specialty? Just Cajun?
It's Cajun Creole.
Yeah.
And you know what? Cape Paul's is pretty great too.
Yeah.
Cape Paul's is pretty great too.
All right.
If you get out of the French Quarter, Commander's Palace, of course, is. I tell you what. If you want fine dining, the place to go is Antoine's. It's the oldest restaurant in the city of New Orleans. That's on St. Louis. And that is a restaurant museum. That is really interesting.